Hi, and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're continuing our exciting series, Mature Buck Mindsets, looking at the mind of big bucks and big buck hunters and just how exceptionally different they are. In this episode, I'm joined by a guest that knows all about taking great bucks, Bill Winke, who has been writing about and videoing these giants of the woods for decades. Please don't mind the background noise as Bill was outdoors, and this was recorded this past summer. And bonus points if you can ID the bird that keeps singing in the background and will not shut up. Okay, but we get into the great lengths you have to be willing to go to get consistent chances at great deer. And it's more than most people probably do. And you can download our free journal to use with the podcast. That's really going to help you not miss any of the great content. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What does Bill say about hunting nocturnal bucks? What factors tell you when to pursue a buck versus just backing off and letting him go, regardless of how big he is? According to Bill, what's the best thing you can hope for when pursuing a mature buck? What is Bill talking about when he says you should hunt backwards? When does Bill say most of the educating of deer actually is taking place? And why did Bill camp under his tree stand? And what vital things did he learn from this tactic of extra effort? And this is a great convo with a lot more in there, guys, as usual. So let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, I'm here with Bill Winke. Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure, Adam. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. We've talked before. I've interviewed Bill for different articles I've written. This is the first time we're kind of face to face, so really appreciate it, Bill. And Bill's got a lot going on. If you don't know Bill Winke, I'm very surprised if you're a whitetail hunter. Uh, Bill's written tons of articles over the years. You probably read. Uh, he had a show called Midwest Whitetail. It was very popular, and now he has his own YouTube channel, right? Bill, is there anything about your background that I left out there that you feel is important?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that maybe just the number of years that I've been privileged and able to dedicate myself to this. I mean, I excuse me, I started in 1990, so that's 34 years, probably going on 35 hunting seasons where I've been able to hunt. I can't say like every day that I wanted to, but a really high percentage of the time. So that's the nice thing about that is, you get to learn a lot of things. I mean,
Right.
if you're only out there for a few weekends a year, you have a certain picture of what you think works and what doesn't, because you don't get a chance to try stuff and see if it works and then test it, over the course of that many years. So I guess that's kind of, if I have, maybe a unique qualification, it's just how many hours I've spent in a tree over 2.5, what is that, 3.5 decades. So it's you start to learn stuff even if you're not trying too hard. You're
Right.
gonna figure something out.
Yeah, even an average hunter is gonna learn something.
Yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of guys maybe don't think about that is, how much time you actually put on stand and stuff, and how many actual time you have encounters with deer is pretty minimal in a season. So it
yeah.
takes a lot of time to actually observe deer, in that setting. So,
And just even to
well,
try stuff and see if it works or not. I mean, like I
right.
said, it takes a long time, to figure that out.
Yeah, well, we're mining nuggets out of your wisdom here, Bill, today. So, I had a couple questions for you and some stories that I think are really interesting that I've heard before. And so we're looking at a couple different topics here. I think the first one I'd like to ask you, looking at the mindset of buck hunters, guys that are more consistent, and then the mindset of bucks, right? And so when I think about that, and I guess decision making. And so I heard a story about you shooting a buck that was missing an eye or blind in an eye, and looking at what I call buck profiles. So that for me, that means uh, getting as much data as I can on a certain deer to try to figure out the when and where I can maybe shoot them. What kind of data, scouting, intel I can get that tells me a high odds, I guess, approach. And so I'd like to ask you about that buck. So uh, what's the story behind the one-eyed deer or the blind-eyed deer, and what do you look for in general when you look at a deer and say, okay, this is what I need to know to go in and potentially kill a certain buck?
Yeah, I think some of that uh, becomes more like common sense and natural after a little while. I think the reason why it's confusing for a lot of people is because they don't have the time, and they may not even have the opportunity because the properties that they hunt are small enough, or whatever the case may be, that they just really can't get on one deer and stay on him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my situation, I think, allows me to do that a little bit more because I have that time on my side, like we talked. Um, and even over the course of seasons, you might learn how to kill the deer. It might take you 3 years, in some cases, but
Yeah.
so it's not quite like there's some magic to it. I think everybody can figure it out given the same opportunities that I've had. So the thing is, how do you shorten that learning curve? The keys to it, obviously, you've got to have a buck that's killable, and we can talk about that. And then you just need to learn as much as you can about that deer without him knowing that you're doing it. And there's probably a little bit of an art to that. Like, everybody back in my early days would rely on deer sign, and the deer sign, it's not specific enough. It doesn't tell you um, one deer necessarily, unless there's something very unique about the sign that it leaves. You're having to make too many assumptions. So that really doesn't help all that much, but it does show you how deer move. So
Mm-hmm.
understanding how deer travel through an area, um, you know, maybe 15, 20 years of old school style hunting, you learn that. You learn, well, they use the terrain a certain way. Those are all skills that are important too. But at the end of the day, you just need to learn as much as you can about that one individual deer, and trail cameras are the key to that. I mean, sightings from season to season, like you mentioned earlier, they're they're pretty few and far between. Unless you've got a really, really visible buck, um, 90% of what you learn about that deer is going to come from trail camera photos. So you're always trying to figure out, where can I put my cameras in places where I can learn, but going in and checking the cameras, I'm not messing stuff up.
Right.
Some people are going to the cellular cameras now, and so far I've never really. I don't own one.
Really.
No, and
Hmm.
it's not. Someday I probably will. I know there's a place for it, but I still like the skill required to be able to check your cameras. It's like part of the hunt. It's like
Yeah.
you have to be able to be sneaky enough to pull off this part of it in order to earn the right to have that information. You shouldn't
Hmm.
just be able to throw a camera out there and put 20 of them on your farm and be flooded with deer hunting information, or deer movement information. Um, I just feel like it's okay. It's just a little too cheap. The information is a little too cheap for me.
Hmm.
It's like I want to feel like I had more challenge in this whole process. So anyway, uh, it's nothing. There's no right or wrong to it. It's whatever the law says is the law. But I just kind of like checking the cameras. So I like that, figuring out, okay, where are the places where I can put them, where I can sneak in and out, or is it on a kind of a daily travel area for people, like a lane going through the farm that we use quite a bit, just different stuff like that, where you start maybe going a little deeper into how to um, outwit, or at least, um, you know, learn what you can without the deer knowing that you're learning it, I guess. So
Yeah.
I have I have a little bit different approach to it, like I said, but that's how I do it. I don't run cameras everywhere. I don't want to know every minute by minute behavior of the buck I'm after. I just want to know where he lives, more or less. You know, where's his core? And if you find his core, that's where you're going to get a lot of daylight photos. And where's his range? Well, his range is going to be any place you pick up any kind of photos.
Right.
So if I know those things, I can kind of figure out within the what I know about how deer move. I can figure out where to get him. Um, I don't want to have a trail camera on every trail, behind every tree, on every corner. It just makes it. I don't know. To me, it just takes too much of the hunt away. I love cameras. Believe me. I mean, they add a lot to the hunt, but you just have to be careful that you don't take away some of the challenge by making the information part too easy. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And there's, probably different opinions on that, but I think the one of the big things is that I call this reverse surveillance. So if you get to the point where you're tipping your hand to the deer, you're just giving them information instead of
Yeah.
the point is you getting information. And really, what you're saying is it shouldn't take that many cameras to do it.
No.
Like you don't need them everywhere.
No. I mean, I went for years and years with 7 cameras. I've got a few more than that now because I've had companies along the way that have given me cameras to test and so forth. So I've probably got 15, 16 cameras, but I don't have them all out all the time. But even
Yeah.
with 7, I could learn a lot with 7 cameras and then just kind of move them around. And but anyway, we kind of got off topic a little bit. I do think that you just need to know that the deer is killable, and you know that by seeing some daylight activity or some fringe daylight activity. It's not they're not showing up at 9, well, 11 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning. You're getting them just
Right.
after legal shooting time or just before legal shooting time or during. If that's the case, then you've got a deer that's worth hunting. If you're picking them up only at night, then you're on the outside edge of their range and you're not anywhere near their core. That being the case, they're much harder to kill. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try them a little bit, but I wouldn't set my season on deer like that because you're just not close enough to where that deer lives.
Yeah. Until so the key point there is he's showing some sort of daily activity where you can actually hunt and kill him
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
Um, and the problem with this is me saying this, but the problem with if you put trail cameras in too deep somewhere and you're
Hmm.
getting this information that makes him seem like, oh, he's daylight active here, but can you actually hunt that without blowing it out?
And
Uh,
I think if
that's
he had that, I think if he had that information, it's still good. You just need to
right,
know that you need to know where he is and that he's on his feet somewhere. And granted, there are certain periods of the season when he's going to be on his feet in more places in daylight. Um, so I mean, you can learn from everything. I've just had bucks before that I only got nighttime pictures of them no matter where I put my cameras, and so I knew that those deer weren't living in the places where I could hunt them, or that I hadn't found him yet. Put it that way.
right.
And sometimes I had properties to hunt that were big enough that I could keep moving my cameras, to the next watershed or whatever you want to call it, the next ridge, and I could keep moving until I finally figured out, where he was spending most of his time. But sometimes you can't do that. You just don't own enough land, or you don't have permission on enough ground, or the public area doesn't, take you, into those areas. And if you're only getting nighttime pictures, I wouldn't. I'd wait before I said that's my buck. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of guys, we've all probably been there where we see a nice buck on camera. It's late at night, and so we get all excited and start hunting them. But that's really wasting time, and you still might be able to shoot him, but you just got to wait until he shows you basically that daylight movement. So that's a
Yeah,
really good point.
and I think there's a couple of opportunities that present themselves, even if you don't have daylight pictures, as long as you're borderline, and that's the cold fronts that come through in October. Those can be really good, and they can get bucks moving in daylight more than they would otherwise. So I would hunt them on those situations, where you've got a cold front come through. Another one is the rut. I mean, once the rut comes, a deer that maybe is living the next ridge over that's not on the property that you have permission or access to hunt,
Yeah.
he can be over on your side. So those are I call them the green flags. You say, yeah, maybe he doesn't seem too cooperative right now, but if these two things happen, then he will be covering more ground. And so I hunt them sporadically, only when those situations present themselves. I don't hunt a buck that's nocturnal very um, very hard at all in October. Um, Unless you get that cold front, all you're going to do is mess it up. So
Yeah, there's no reason to. There's no data to tell you to do that unless certain things line up. And as far as the one-eyed buck thing, uh, you know, did you so for that we can't spend a ton of time on this, but do you set up on, okay, he's coming this way, so I'm going to set up on the side that he can't see type thing? I was always would be a helpful thing to know, but
yeah, no,
um,
they you don't know them that well. Um, they're not um, computers that you can program. The best thing you can hope for, in my opinion, is to be where that deer lives and in the areas that are huntable for you. You don't know enough, and he's not programmable enough for you to be, to narrow it down like that. I mean, he could come from any direction. I mean, you're just
right.
trying to find spots that you can get into and out of without him knowing that you can hunt. But no, I mean, I just anything I can get from a shot perspective or a setup perspective in areas where I know that the deer spends some of his time in daylight. Um, that's all I'm looking for. I'm not. That's hard enough. But yeah, that deer in particular, he was pretty easy. Some of them are pretty easy, and some of them are really hard to kill. And he lived on about two ridges, from what I could tell on the trail cam photos I was getting from him. And I didn't have tons of cameras out, but he wasn't showing up, outside of those areas. And then there was a little field. I planted a food plot into soybeans in the valley below those ridges, and I didn't know the deer was here. It was the first year that I'd hunted this farm where I'm at now, and it just happened that he was daylight active in that little small area. So he was probably living on 30 or 40 acres. But my guess is he was probably really old.
Mm,
Um, in my experience, the older they get, they compress their ranges more, and they become surprisingly more daylight active within those ranges. But they've got to be really old in order to kind of hit that point. Um, so anyway, he was. I killed him the second time I hunted him down on that soybean plot, and he showed up way before the end of legal shooting time. He was just standing there watching for does and just
mm,
waiting along the edge. And then eventually some does came out and a small buck came out behind me, and that just got lucky, and they moved my direction. He got jealous of that little buck and he came running down there. And so I didn't do anything like super magical there. It was more, like I said, of just knowing that I had a buck that was killable,
mm,
and knowing roughly where that deer lived, and then picking spots within that area, where I knew that the deer lived, that I could hunt effectively without him knowing.
yeah.
And then you just put your time in after that. If you think I've got this spot that I can go in and I can get him, then that may be the case. But a lot of times when you have that mindset, those spots are too aggressive or too risky. Um, I'm a fringe guy. Very rarely do I go in, quote unquote, go in after them, because there's just too much other stuff that can go wrong in the process of doing that, unless it's really bulletproof setup. I'd rather hang around the edges of where I believe that he lives, and hunt spots that he can't. pick me up or no other deer can pick me up, or very few, and then
Yeah.
just time in. Anyway, that's my mindset. Uh, I'm very conservative. Some people say I'm conservative to a fault, but I don't think so. I think that once they know you're hunting them, they become way harder to kill.
Right. Yeah.
So I just try to preserve that element of surprise for as long as I possibly can. And, yeah, there are situations where if I was more aggressive, I probably could have gotten certain deer that I never got, or maybe could have got them sooner. But there's always that same risk of saying, well, you know, either he would have picked me up or some other deer would have picked me up. And then through their body language, he would have figured out that, things weren't right. Um, so I guess that's my mindset. Um, and I think the mindset of the bucks, um, every one of them is different, and trail cameras help you figure out a little bit more about them. But like I said, sometimes it takes you a couple of years before, you've tried this and you've tried that, and his range was too big. He wasn't quite daylight active enough. Then he gets a year older. You learn a little bit more about how to sneak in and out, and then the pieces fall into place, and you're able to kill him. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy that process of
A
picking one.
chess match.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
even have to be the biggest one.
Right.
You Um, you
And
always you always want to go after the biggest one, but sometimes there just isn't one with big antlers. So you just pick something else. It's the game.
right.
Mosquitoes, but yeah.
Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. It can be daunting knowing what great efforts will produce the results that we actually want. And many times it can feel like we're spinning our wheels in our efforts. So here's a few things to think about when you feel this way. First, look at the long game approach to hunting and that over time you want to increase your success or efficiency. It won't happen overnight, so have the expectation that sometimes our efforts just won't immediately pay off. Second, be willing to try new things and again realize some may or may not work, and that's also okay. The best hunters have challenges as well, but they are willing to take risks, and remind yourself of that. Correct education can greatly help shortcut this, but you still have to put in the work, so just remember those things. Something to think about when pursuing a challenging animal like a big old white-tailed deer. And if you want to know the exact work you personally need to focus on to get the greatest results for you, the Deer IQ test is designed to do just that. It systematically takes you through the 6 core competencies of highly effective hunters, the best ones, and clearly reveals just how you stack up. It's a great tool for those truly wanting to up their game as a deer hunter, and also includes a consultation to go over the results. Check that out linked below, as well as our high IQ services such as private land plans and our weekend workshop that is an intensive into those 6 core competencies essential for great hunters. It picks up where the test leaves off. Check those all out below or email me at adam@deeriq.com with any questions. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast. And I think that's, you're in Iowa, right? And that's, guys need to remember too that to your area, what can you actually shoot in your area? Like being realistic about that. And also private versus public. I'll just throw this in here. That in a more private approach where you're controlling everything, more conservative tends to be the winning strategy. Where public, you really have to weigh more things, which is the other hunters too. And that's something I deal with a lot where uh, I might have tabs on one, and if no one else was in the equation, I'd be much more conservative. But then you have to, be real careful about being more aggressive and how aggressive you should be and all that. But in private, yeah, definitely conservative seems to be the approach. And a few years ago, we talked about this idea. You mentioned this, the idea of hunting backwards, which I think you're kind of talking about, where you hunt the fringe, right? You figure out where he is active, where his core is, or where his home is, kind of, and then you back away from there instead of jumping in there, where
I,
his home is, right?
my
Um,
philosophy on hunting backwards is you start with the entry and exit routes, and then you pick your stands off those. Because most people, they scout, they look for the sign, and they see the awesome spots, and then they put their stand up and try to figure out how to get in and out to those spots.
yeah,
Um, so for me to go backwards is to say the entry and exit is the most important part of any hunting strategy. And then, what is the best stand location I can find that I can get to using these entry and exit routes. So that's my backwards approach is,
right.
entry and exit first and sign and stand location second.
Yeah, so a few years ago, guys may have seen this. I think you did some videos on it. You actually camped at your tree at your hunting spot, and so I'd like to chat about that for a minute, as far as approach to, like, when do I know uh, when I dive in? I call that pretty aggressive approach, right? So
No,
what was your mindset behind that one, and what
that's
did
a
you learn?
that's a super conservative approach because basically, if they're picking you up by coming and going, if you're never coming and going, they can't pick you up.
Mhm,
So you're talking about public land. If I was hunting public land all the time and I didn't have a cameraman with me, I would almost never come out. I would almost always sleep, in the woods because if you're going in deep enough to get away from the other hunters, uh, it's the coming and going that's going to educate the deer. Probably you can find some spot in there where you've got a train advantage or somehow where your scent isn't blowing to the deer once you get into the tree. But that coming and going, um, that's how the deer figure out that they're being hunted usually. So if you're not coming and going, they can't pick that up. So that to me, it's not aggressive. Aggressive is when you hunt the best sign and you hope for the best. It's almost like you throw caution to the wind.
mhm,
Uh, I'm still hunting fairly conservative stands. I'm just not coming and going. Um, so that's the whole point. That farm where I did that, um, I had only bottom access, and it was a big valley with these ridges on both sides. And the only way you could get in and out of there was to go, down the valley and back out to the vehicle. And that's where all the deer were at in the morning, first thing when you'd go in, and that's where they were all headed towards, in the evening when you'd leave. And I tried to hunt it one year, using the conventional approach where you just come and go, in low light. And gosh, especially when the wind drops at the end of legal shooting time and you try to sneak out and it's dry leaves. It's almost like every deer on the whole property knew that I was moving. So, there was one buck I was after, and I thought the only way I'm going to kill this deer, I knew which ridge he was mostly living on, and I thought the only way I'm going to kill this deer is if I just go up there and then don't leave. And it worked really well because usually in the middle of the day, the wind blows and you get like enough background noise, enough movement of the trees and branches and stuff that you can sneak in and out of those areas. Even if it's the fringe of a bedding area, uh, I snuck past a lot of deer that I saw bedded. I'd
mm,
glass ahead, going in at midday, and you'd see them, and you just kind of work your way around them. They're very um, relaxed once they bed. They're Everybody thinks that they're alert the whole time. I think they're very alert until they bed, and then I think they just shut down. It's sort of like
mhm,
when they get their peace. They figure they've already checked it out. The spot's safe. I'm not going to
right,
worry about this anymore. Um, so I learned a lot about bedded deer, how they bed, um, how they behave. Because the other thing that you have when you stay there all night is you can hear them at night moving around. And I was really surprised how many deer are still in the bedding areas during the night. They tend to move out. They start moving away about an hour before dark, and they're just working their way away from where they bed. It's almost like
mhm,
they vacate. But then somewhere during the night, they start drifting back in again, little by little, and they don't wait until first light in the morning to all come back. It's just a process of kind of coming and going. And that was interesting. But no, the main thing on that strategy, and I've talked to a bunch of guys since that do it, and just in a little bit roundabout different way, um, is they you just if you can't come and go without the deer knowing, there's two things, two outcomes. Either you can't hunt that spot, or you can't come and go.
Mm,
So
yeah.
you know that's all there is to it. I mean, there's some spots that you just can't hunt because the deer know you're on their way in. Well, the only way you're going to hunt that spot is you just can't leave. And I had a system that worked really well. I mean, we could dive into the details of it, but it really did work, and the deer didn't know that I was there because the big kickback I got from everybody was like, "Oh, you're fouling your spot. I mean, you're there all night long." Well, it's not quite. It wasn't quite like that. It's not like I was just, doing jumping jacks at the base of my tree all night long. I mean, the deer didn't know I was there, during the night. Um, if they picked up on me, it was only because I was snoring.
Mm. Yeah, and I would guess that because probably everybody's thought about that. Like, oh, if I could just stay in the tree, all night and not because it's so quiet. Let's say it's an evening hunt and you're trying to sneak out. Like, it gets so quiet and still that just exiting is so noisy. And it's like, oh, I wish I could just stay here. But a lot of guys have probably thought about it. Probably very few have done it. But you basically were in a bivvy or something. So
Yeah,
your scent, it probably is staying within that, even if you had a
yeah,
little tent or something. Like, it's not going everywhere, I
right.
would
And it's not.
guess.
Yes, and also everybody says, well, why don't you stay in the tree? Because they make different ways of, suspension systems or whatever that you can sleep in the tree. But there's two problems with that. First one is now you've got all this airborne scent because whatever
Right.
scent you do have is in the air.
Hmm.
Um, the other problem with it is there's no insulation underneath your body. If it's just air moving through. So, like, let's say that I get on the ground and I dig down through the leaves and I get right, up against the base of a fallen log or something with my little bivvy. Well, gosh, I mean, it's as soon as I warm up that spot under my body, and I have a little small thermal pad that I take with too that helps for insulation. I might be laying on something that's 45 degrees, and it kind of retains my scent, or not my scent, but my heat. But let's say it's 20 degrees out that night, and I'm up in the tree. Well, there's nothing I can do to make the air underneath my quote unquote bed warmer than 20 degrees. So
Right.
you freeze. Not only
Mm.
that, but then your scent is blowing everywhere. So getting on the ground, burrowing right down in, um, not only does that, the wind blows over all that stuff. It's not like, it's taking very much scent when you're that low profile and maybe you're like
Right.
up against a fallen log or, I mean, your scent's not going anywhere, especially when you're inside that nylon bivvy. Uh, I took a rubber canoe bag that we use when we go, up north canoe, and I put all my gear in that every night. Two things, to keep the scent down, and then also to prevent dew from getting all my stuff wet. Um, I mean, I had deer that would circle around me. It was really weird, to be honest with
Mm.
you. I mean, you'd wake up at 2 in the morning and there'd be something crunching, and you'd listen. And it'd be like 15 feet away, make a circle around you, and then it would walk off. Or you'd get coyotes that would light up, like, maybe 75 yards away. And you know how they do, they get to yipping and there's like, sounds like
Yeah.
there's 50 of them when there's, four of them. And that would make the hair on the back of your neck go up too. But, there was other weird stuff, that you experience, but mostly it's just super boring because, during that time of the year, the sun sets fairly early and it doesn't rise until, fairly late. So you've
Right.
got 13 hours to kill. And gosh, I was getting so much sleep. I was sleeping like 10, 11 hours every night.
Well, that's another thing too. Just that point right there, because a lot of times, guys get hunting and they're out late, getting back. They gotta get their gear around, re-prep that for, let's say, a morning hunt. Then you got to get up early and drive back. Like you're getting less sleep. So that's a selling point right there. Honestly, to me, is I don't have to do all that stuff, and I'm getting more sleep instead of less. But
Yeah, and
um,
the other thing that was interesting too was at first I was getting up before daylight and going to my tree. Because my tree might be 15 yards away or whatever, because you had to find some place that was advantageous to set your little
okay,
quote unquote camp. It's not right at the base of the tree because it might not be like I said, that set of conditions where you can really hide yourself. Well, when I'd go sneaking over to my tree, the odd deer would pick me up because he'd have to crunch, crunch, crunch through the still morning air. I mean, it wasn't like the wind was up. So I found that I did better if I waited until daylight. Even though I'm only 20 yards away from my tree, I had better success on that little 20-yard sneak if it was daylight. Like
hmm,
if turkeys were already talking and the birds were singing and the
okay,
squirrels were on the ground, crunching around a little bit, I could make it real easily to my tree without any deer paying any attention. You might even be sneaking along and you look up and there's one 30 yards away, going
yeah,
through the bedding area. It's really weird. Um, you're not living with the deer. They don't want you there. They just don't know you're there.
mm-hmm,
But it was. I mean, if I didn't have a cameraman, gosh, I mean, I shouldn't use that as an excuse, but when you double up on everything, it just makes the hunting so much harder. Um,
right,
Now you got two people trying to do all this stuff. Now you got to hide two people. You got to sneak two people. You got to have all the equipment for two people because you can't just take any old sleeping bag and make this work if it's 20 degrees out.
mm-hmm,
So by the time you go through all the trouble of making it work for one person, you try to do it for two people. It's like it's not worth it. So again, that's one of the things that I really don't like about filming is how it limits the ways that you can hunt, like the creative ways that you can hunt, because everything is like, it's not double as hard, it's worse. Because for whatever reason, the guy that's carrying the camera generally isn't as good a hunter as you are, and they generally aren't as patient or as sneaky or whatever. Otherwise, they'd be in front of the camera and you'd be carrying it, right? So you end up with, and it's not like they're making mistakes on purpose. They just don't have the experience of
yeah,
exactly how to move exactly when.
yeah. Interesting. Do you think those deer that were kind of around you when you were in the bivvy, do you think they knew you were there and they were trying to figure out what you were, or they were just meandering around?
No, they knew something was there. They just didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they picked up a little bit of human scent, because, obviously you're breathing, so they may have picked up something, but whatever they picked up, it wasn't enough to alert them because they always just walked off. You know,
Yeah.
the only times when I got into trouble, and I know it's because I was snoring when I'd wake up, there might be a doe standing like 10 feet away, staring at me. I'd be like, oh crap, why was she standing there staring at me? Well, she heard me snoring, she heard me breathing. Um,
Yeah. Huh.
so that was the only thing that sometimes got me. But no, and again, like I said, if I was hunting public land, you'd only see me, at the middle of the day, recharging my batteries at the vehicle, and then I'd be going back in again. You'd never see me
Mm.
in at night because I'd just go in where nobody else goes and then just stay.
Yeah. It's a really good idea. And I'll try to wrap it up here. But real quick question on the bivvy versus small tent is like I have a small tent, but what's the difference there, and why did you specifically choose bivvy?
Well, the bivy doesn't have any structure to it. It basically takes the shape of your sleeping bag. Um, so you put your pad and your sleeping bag inside the bivy, and then when you dig that in, like you pull all the leaves away and everything, you're at ground level
Hmm.
because the tent is going to have a profile. A deer 15 feet away walking past is going to see something with the tent there, but with the bivy they don't. I mean, I went one spot I went into. There were two fallen logs, like maybe it was one big tree, and I was in the fork, of two parts of it or something. But I mean, I had that thing. It was like 10 yards from my stand. And during the day, I'd throw leaves and sticks over my little camp there, so that the deer couldn't see it when I was hunting. Well, I couldn't see it. I mean, there's no way. And I was up in the air. There's spots that you can find where there's no possible way the deer would know you were there unless they picked up a little scent. So that's why I like the Bivvy. Plus, it's super easy to carry. I mean, it's like,
Right.
it's like the size of a tennis shoe, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not like you don't need a tent. It'd be different if you're going to go through all the camping. It's like you're not camping, you're just sleeping. So whatever food you take needs to be, trail bars and beef jerky and stuff like that. It's not like you're going to have a little Coleman stove and sit around the campfire.
Right. Yeah.
All you're trying to do is stay hidden, for as long as you can. And, I only did it I only went 2 nights in a row, once. Normally I'd go in, on the windy part of the day, and I'd come out on the windy part of the day, and then I'd change locations or whatever I needed to do. I think for 12 days I hunted that buck, and I never once didn't sleep in the woods during that time. But it wasn't always, like day after day after day in the same spot. So you get a little break. You could come out, go to the closest town, use the restroom, get some fresh coffee or whatever. I mean, it's not like you're up there being miserable all the time.
Right.
But yeah, I just think it's not nearly as extreme as what people made it out to be. And I think the whole takeaway is not so much this is what everybody should do, but this is the lengths that you have to go to if you're going to be successful when it comes to the entry and exit.
Yeah.
If they know you're coming and going, there's 2 options. Either you can't hunt that spot or you can't leave. Well, obviously, if you're not willing to stay, then you can't hunt that spot. And that's the mindset that I think you're trying to get at is there's just some things you can't do that just because the deer know. And, as much as you really want to, and I still find myself doing it, like I get really tempted to go into spots and hunt spots I know in the back of my mind I shouldn't, but it's like, well, maybe I can get away with it. Well, you just don't. That's how you ruin your hunting spot is by, falling victim to that temptation.
Yeah, it's easy to think you can, I can get away with it, right? Like there's something special about you, and there really isn't.
Or you're just hoping that today's your lucky day. Like, well,
Right, yeah.
maybe there won't be one bedded up on that little ridge and I can sneak through there or whatever. Well, yeah, but 75% of the time there is. Well, you're rolling the dice, in a really low odds game.
Yep. Yeah, it is about the odds.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bill, that's a lot of stuff for guys to think about. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing here today. Share with everybody that's listening, like where can they find you and your stuff? I know you're on YouTube a lot now, right?
Yeah, just the Bill Winke YouTube channel is the best place, and we've got several series that we produce there. We've got one that deals with land and deer management. We got a series that's focused on just the hunting part that doesn't differentiate between any kind of land use at all. I mean, it's kind of tips, that follows me through the season. And then, we do some stuff with gear and, how to set up equipment and stuff like that. So hopefully there's something there for any hardcore whitetail enthusiast that they can find on that channel.
Awesome. And I'll link that in the show notes here. So, well, thanks again, Bill. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. So here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. Are you willing to do the extra effort that's really required, like camping out in the woods under your stand, just to have a crack at a big buck? What can you do to leave the mediocre efforts behind? And next time we continue with a legend in the deer research world, John Azoga, as we continue to talk about mature bucks and his decades of research related to them. You won't want to miss that high IQ episode, and I'll see you then.